Welcome to ecotopiaU. I'm your host, Melissa McGinnis. I'm with my co-host, Tom Wright. And today we're discussing the circular economy. Whoa, this sounds big.
Well, I mean, it's a generic term for an industrial economy that is, by design or intention, restorative, and in which materials flows are of two types: biological nutrients designed to re-enter the biosphere safely, and technical nutrients were designed to circulate at a high quality without re-entering the biosphere. Probably people know that as cradle to cradle, but generically there's been a philosophy called the circular economy since the early 90s.
It sounds to me like a whole lot of recycling.
Well, it's recycling of material in the technical sphere, yes. But in terms of the overall, it's not the only goal. Maybe we should talk about some of the assumptions behind the circular economy first. I think a lot of people listening have heard about triple bottom line, which normally is shown as a graphic of the economy, the society, and the environment interchanging what's called a Venn diagram, which is the idea that these three spheres as circles are shown graphically. They overlap. In fact, I'm looking at a graphic here from the U.S. Botanical Gardens, and they refer to the three components of sustainable development. And it has the healthy environment, the social justice, and the economic growth spheres all intersecting perfectly, and somehow in the middle that there's magically a sustainable society. It's really not true. What's true is that the environment is a priori. Without a living environment, there would be no society. Without a society, there would be no economy. So the real graphic to put in your mind's eye is three nested circles in which our economy sits within our society, which sits within nature, which sits within the living ecology of the planet. That's the real. That's the assumption of a circular economy, is that we're living on a living planet with finite resources. It's closed. It is a system that is closed to introduction of matter, more or less. Yes, there's been an asteroid come in and been a satellite go out, but relatively closed to matter and open to energy from the sun. That's the system that we have to learn how to deal with. That is the economy.
When I was doing some research for this show, I learned that currently we're living in a linear economy.
Yeah, you'll either hear it as take, make, waste, or take, make, dispose. It's really done. It's pretty easy for anybody who lives in an urban society when they see the trash bins fill up that we're disposing of resources. And so the simple idea in a circular economy, there's no such thing as waste.
Before the Industrial Revolution, were we living in a circular economy?
It's a great question, and the answer is, to a certain extent, of course we were, because before there was fossil inputs, in particular, whether it was coal or petroleum, everything was done within the biological sphere, more or less. I mean, we used oxen that ate plants to drive our plows.
We used glass jars that we reused.
And the glass jars were made from limestone mainly, right? And there was relatively abundant limestone and sand, and so yes, although that's an example of a technical nutrient. Glass is an example of technical nutrient because it's not designed. Obviously, you don't want to put glass in your soil, for instance, to be obvious about the problem. So, but you're correct that 10,000 years ago we definitely were a biological circular economy. That's correct.
But we have gotten so far away from
Right.
having a circular mentality. We really are a wasteful society at this stage.
Whether you call it built-in obsolescence or whether disposability and convenience are seen more valuable, yes.
So how do we potentially start to look at ways to engage in more circular practices, because that's what's going to put together a circular economy or a circular community?
Well, I do think the fundamental issues are valuing the lack of waste, and therefore you have to almost flip it on its head when waste has become expensive. I mean, that's one of the easier ways is if you have landfill taxes, or and people don't like to hear it that way, landfill fees, but we know that people waste less and recycle better the higher landfill costs are. We know that's true. So there's you know the phrase "sweep it under the rug." Well, we've created rugs that are very deep pits in places, and people tend to put a lot of the excess in those pits, and that's not circular, of course, if you bury it. Another distinction that I should draw here so people understand, because a lot of the listeners may have heard of concepts of waste energy or incinerating garbage for energy. That's also non-circular when you think about it, because you're losing the resource basically for good by incinerating it, and therefore you're creating demand upstream for more non-renewables. So the idea of a circular economy is to try to run the planet off of renewable income, solar income. Now, solar income is more than just solar energy. Wind energy is a form of solar income. Geothermal is not solar income per se, but obviously the planet's heating device, the geothermal heating devices, came from the building of the planet itself out of the solar system when the solar system was created. So in that sense, it's solar energy. But renewable energy really is the key to a cradle-to-cradle's input system, as things are made from renewable energy as a source of how you made it. Therefore, to take our fossil resources and understand how, even the show, we're doing this on New Year's Eve before 2015, and I'm in Southern California, and as a Northern Californian, which I am, I always notice when I come down to Southern California, the price of gas is cheaper. And I know there's some more petroleum resources here. And of course, there's a famous city called El Segundo, which is the second Chevron plant. The first Chevron plant, El Primero, is in Richmond, California, which is Northern California. And so I'm always surprised that we pay 20 cents a gallon more in Southern California. At the same time, the price is approaching $2.39 a gallon, when a year ago it was more like $3.69 a gallon. And so people are probably listening and going, well, why should we get rid of the fossil resources when they're getting cheaper? I don't think that's true, by the way. I do think that fossil resources are actually getting more expensive. We're living in an interesting political time, and how this relates to the circular economy. Well, obviously, if you keep cheap fossil resources and people keep using them, it would push away the idea of no waste. It would promote wasting, because people would see things as cheap. I mean, the simple way to think about when I'm talking about wasting is if gasoline's expensive, I'm not going to buy an SUV to drive around by myself. Mm-hmm. Gasoline's cheap, I might buy the SUV to drive around by myself. So that doesn't help the circular economy manifest, as an example. Why do I say the price is kind of falsely cheap? Well, because obviously price points are developed on supply and demand. So supply must be pretty big right now to keep this price down. I find it curious when we're dealing with a relatively scarce resource, what petroleum is by definition. There's not being not creating more today.
Right.
They may be finding more today, but that's not the same as creating more today.
Right.
So at the same time, what they're finding should cost more, not in dollars and cents maybe, but in terms of energy. In other words, the BTU to get that stuff is deeper. It's the Beverly Hillbilly stuff has left us.
To go and excavate it and find it.
Extract it and refine it. And you're in the Gulf of Mexico. Everybody knows about the horrible situation that happened in the Gulf of Mexico a few years ago. So it's more expensive to get. This is going to have to self-correct. And I would think, whether it's at $5 a gallon or $7 a gallon, it's going to click in that the circular economy is more a true economy. I don't know. But there's some price point out there where it's going to click in to normal days life, where people hopefully stop complaining and start not wasting, and start to understand that there really isn't. In nature, there is no such thing as waste. What appears as waste is food for something else. And that's what we're trying to do, is create things in a cycle.
So this concept of circular economy really has been derived from our ecosystems, where there is no waste.
Yeah, there's no waste. And well, I think it's funny if you just shift your mind and stop saying economy and say economical. What's more economical? And if I said to you, is it more economical to waste or to not waste? What would your mind normally say? Is it more economical to waste, or is it more economical to not waste?
I would think not waste.
Yes, and so it's kind of funny that it's somewhat obvious to our, just the normal common sense of the topic. But to the extent that we have a culture that's got used to this take, make, dispose.
It's a convenience. We're a convenience culture, right?
Yes.
How do you suggest we're going to reframe our minds? You think it's going to be through price points?
Well,
Because
in a consumer culture, I don't want to it's not rocket science, is it? That in consumer cultures, if you raise prices, then consumption slows down.
We've had the debate before about fossil fuel, and gasoline's it's really not the accurate price if you take in wars and all of the things that go in.
All the externalities, right? Yeah, about probably half the defense budget could be allocated towards the production of fossil.
So if we were really paying $18, $20 a gallon, we would buy more electric cars.
There's a gentleman named Amory Lovins, and you'd have to get the book itself where he quotes all these additives, all the externalities, and then this a few years back he wrote it, but it was around $11 a gallon that Amory calculated the true price at the pump should be. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so who's responsible for the circular economy? I mean, how are we is it companies? Is it individuals? Is it the government?
It's all the above. In the EU, they've been trying to promote it through the government, through the governance of the European Union. It hasn't quite got there. They had some proposals that have been shelved for now. Basically, some of the way to understand some of the simple proposals. One is you can either say you close or eliminate landfills. Same with waste incineration, or you make it very expensive to do such things, and of course that pushes new design. Companies themselves can take the high ground, and there's many examples. If you go to the Cradle to Cradle C2Cinstitute.org website, you will see many companies that are already starting on this path towards cradle to cradle economics.
And that is in the design. So we're not talking about the afterlife of a product when we speak of cradle to cradle, and I'm assuming this fits in perfectly with circular economy, but how that package or that product is actually designed to be one from potentially recycled material, but also highly recyclable.
Yes, it better be both. Mm-hmm. That's you bring up a great point, which is that a circular economy is only as good as the infrastructure for things to cycle. And if things can't cycle, then they're not going to be circular, are they? So it is very important that if we are going to brag about creating a circular economy, that we have the right types of materials. In other words, glass you brought up earlier. Glass does become itself relatively easy again and again and again. But the listener should understand that glass is not as simple as you think, too. Americans are used to putting all glass into a blue bin, or one recycling bin. The truth of the matter is, if we wanted a circular economy, I'm just giving this as an example of keeping the value in the cycle going. Mm-hmm. You'd want to separate glass from the regular recyclables because it's a totally different material because it breaks. And its color needs to be separated too. In other words, amber, what people call brown, the glass industry calls amber. Amber glass needs to be separated from green glass, needs to be separated from clear glass, which the industry calls flint. So there's 3 streams of glass out there, is what I'm saying. And it would be, if we wanted it to work best in a circular economy, we would want to separate them. In other words, that's how you would separate them in your bins. So therefore, they wouldn't get commingled. They wouldn't get contaminated by things that aren't technical nutrients, don't belong with them.
No, this is something that I just don't think everyone would just know. I mean, this is definitely a mandate, or back to, price point. If it gets more expensive to throw things away versus recycle, I guess I would take the time, but I would need someone to educate me and inform me.
Back to convenience, I think, as you know, I work with some retail chains on this kind of issue, and I know that recycling rates go up when you make it easy for the employees of the business to recycle. In other words, the container is there for them to recycle. It's the same at home, same at school, same at church, wherever you're at. If the bin is closer by and more convenient, and who's ever doing the procurement for the economic system you're in, if they're smart enough to kind of understand it by a ratio, in other words, they know they're buying certain things that are made of plastic or certain things that are made of metal or certain things that are made of glass, and therefore they provide for a canister, an outlet for that. That's also smart. Reuse is also is a higher art than recycle. And how we'll ever get back to reusing things more is a great question. But, in Canada, which is, I think, the country just north of here.
Canada,
yeah. They still have reusable beer bottles. And it's still the most common way you get a glass bottle.
I think they have that in Germany.
Yes, they do. It's very common in Germany. I think it's 32 times the average use of one beer bottle in Germany, something like that. Now, people will say, well, yeah, they have density compared to the United States. In other words, Germany's basically the size of Oregon, and I think there's 50 million people there. So I get it. I get it that's true because density makes it logistically easier. But to say that Los Angeles or the Bay Area or Metro New York couldn't have reusable systems, I just don't. I think the mind that says you can't have reusable system has bought in it's okay to waste, it's okay to dispose, and therefore the cycle isn't what you're after. In a circular economy, again, is it more economical to waste or not waste?
Mm-hmm. So you're, in terms of the circular economy, the leading countries, or you said the EU is that's the most defined model.
Well, there's a foundation called the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and you could again Google that and go to their website. You'll see that they're the sort of the center proponent, along with Michael Braungart, who's the European side of the Cradle to Cradle pair. Michael has his company. The initials are EPEA, and Braungart is BRAUNGART. If you look those up, you'll all the between those two sources, you'll see a lot of information about the circular economy in the EU.
Now, here in the U.S., we know corporations are probably not going to do the right thing if they cost more money.
Yeah.
So how do we work against creating or designing packaging and products that actually have recycled content, that are more recyclable, more responsibly produced if they cost more money?
Yeah, you're nailing the conundrum. I don't know. I guess at some point you do need to think of the whole system and how people could afford to live with higher priced things because they use them. They don't consume so many of them. I mean, it's the idea that instead of having a car for 3 years, you'd have a car for 10 years, or maybe you'd have a car for a lifetime because all the parts are just interchangeable. And that's stretching people's minds. And I probably just had a General Motors CEO had a heart attack listening to this. But that's part of the issue here is that things aren't designed for obsolescence. They're designed to stay in a cycle. They're economical because
they cost more if you bought one Ford versus four over a lifetime, but you paid for the price of 4 in one, you'd keep it longer.
And it'd be actually more economical for you. It'd be more economical to the system. I guess I should mention some of the false measurements that the linear economy, the take-make waste economy uses, which probably the one to pick on the most is called gross domestic product or gross national product, GDP or GNP. And the way I explain it is just a calorie counter. It just adds up how much stuff is used and then says that we're all better because we use more stuff. Well, I ask, just again, rhetorically, does everybody out there want to be a 400-pound person? So does using more stuff actually work? It's not true. And then one of the more simple trivia is that when the Exxon Valdez spilled, it was worth 3 times as much to the economy as if that same carrier had that same tanker and made it to port and all the petroleum had been refined and redistributed as gasoline, because the cleanup and everything costs more money, costs more energy.
Which comes back into our pocketbooks.
Well,
so everything we're buying actually is going to be costing more because of the spill, and it's all
at the same
interconnected.
time, but we're saying this is my point. We're saying this is good for society because it created more jobs because we had to clean it up. Yet, of course, it doesn't take into, again, back to true cost. It doesn't take into externalities that all these living beings out there are dead, and there's ecosystems that are still in tragic shape because of the spill, and they're not being productive. So it's
Well,
it's a funny system. As somebody who's trained in economics, to look at something as an economy, but it's not economical.
as seeing the spill down in the Gulf of Mexico firsthand, I could see why I care. Why should our audience care or try to fight for a circular economy?
Well, fight. It's one of these things that I think it's worth reading Cradle to Cradle, the book. That would help anybody to understand why this is a better way of thinking, because designing away the problem is the best leverage point. That's what that book's all about. Is it explains the problem, explains the setting, and so. The problem itself, of course, doesn't affect any one individual so much as it starts to affect the society.
I'd like to point out that is a very not just interesting book, but it does expand your mind. It's really it sets the groundwork for a circular economy and why you should care. And if you want to Google, I did interview William McDonough. You could look at it at YouTube. Just Google Melissa McGinnis and William McDonough, and that interview should pop up, and that should provide some insight and also potentially read the book.
Yes, and then there's another book that has some examples of the circular economy. It's called The Blue Economy by a gentleman named Gunter Pauli, who's also one of the founders of the International Zero Waste Movement. And Gunter Pauli, his last name is spelled Pauli. If I remember right, he speaks 6 languages fluently, so he's one of those kind of uber characters. And he's written a lot about this stuff. Another book for those who like more technical books about this is called The Performance Economy. It actually predates all these books, and it's by a gentleman named Walter Stahel, Stahel, who is an architect and economist, and in some ways the founding father of the path that I decided to take was industrial ecoecology.
But I suppose why we should care is, you showed some examples on your YouTube account, which will have links on our website, but they really discuss sustainability. So circular economy is sustainable, and what's not sustainable is this linear economy. We are going to run out of resources.
Well, whether we run out specifically or not, obviously there's going to be a crunch time. And we are adding population still. I mean, there's a lot of argument why we should have that the main issue of the industrial economy is actually creating zero population growth. In other words, one of the simple fixes would be just to have less people, and therefore you'd have less waste. But I don't find that. Again, back to my point about the 400-pound man. I mean, it's true, by the way, if people go to the federal website about total waste per capita. The peak was about the year 2000, I think almost 5 pounds, and now we're down to about 4.5 pounds per person.
Ooh, it lost half stone.
It's about 10% decrease. At the same time, that's a per capita thing, and we've grown more than we've grown approximately 10% since then. So the amount of stuff, and again, the Earth's finite. That's why I was talking about the assumptions at first. For listeners that are struggling with why this is important. The Earth's not going to gain weight. The Earth's not going to be the 400-pound planet. Earth's going to stay the basic orbit is until the sun bursts, by the way, until something happens to where the Earth can't sustain life. That's billions of years from now, most likely. So for a human, it's probably it's about job. It's about the future. It's intergenerational equity. It's a fancy term for caring about other people's lives in the future. Your great-great-grandchildren, which for most people listening, you will never see. Although I just met a great-great-grandmother, so I know they exist. So maybe I put 3 greats in there. But the founding principle is waste is food, diversity is a strength, energy must come from renewable resources, and we must think we might put these together in a system. And it's really important to do that because until you put it together in a system and you create loops in your mind, and you see loops in your mind, you're still probably wanting to waste things. You still want to do the take, make, waste gig. and it's a tough shift in the mind. It's a worldview. It's a shift in
So
worldview.
if you wanted to really start like conceptually thinking about a circular economy, would a zero waste path just kind of have this in your mantra in your mind that I'm gonna waste less and my goal is zero waste?
Yeah, because the zero waste are damn close. That's how I often say it, because it's probably, again, in our culture, probably really hard to get to zero. But there are zero waste certification processes now, and by the way, that definition is held at the U.S. Zero Waste Business Council website, and it's at least 90% diversion of your throughput, your business's waste stream. But again, you'd probably see me grimace because I realize I'm here on a radio show talking to an audience, and I'm still using the word waste as the way to define things.
Waste is not waste. It's actually a nutrient. It could be food for something else.
Yeah.
And also, putting stuff in a landfill contributes to our climate chaos.
Well, it's hard, especially organic material.
Yeah.
Now, the state of California just passed some legislation that in the next 5 years is going to reduce the amount of about green cell material by 90% going into landfills in California. Obviously, other countries are doing the same thing. Other places are doing the same thing, recognizing, and that's because organic material creates methane. And again, if you hear about the landfills getting capped and they're mining methane, that's true. But anywhere from 80 to 90% of the methane has already been released by the time the landfill gets capped. So,
which has more impact on.
It's 20 odd sometimes more impactful in terms of that thesis, the greenhouse gas theory.
More than driving cars.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's just another reason why you should care about circular economy. But go to our website at ecotopiaU.tv to join the conversation. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions about why you should care about the circular economy and what you can do about it, how about just some tips for just an everyday you and me that wants to just really start getting their head around the circular economy and wanting to participate? What would you suggest?
Well, there's any number of simple issues you could take up. I guess I do think this is one of these topics you need to read a book.
Read a book.
Read a book first, because
but borrow one if you can.
Yeah. I'll go to the library and look for Cradle to Cradle. It's a good book to start with, because the nomenclature, you have to, once you become comfortable with the nomenclature and you realize that there is the concept of waste needs to become obsolete. And the book says that. And the book
so reusing less, reducing.
Reducing is the highest art. Reusing is the next higher art. Then recycling.
Yeah. And support companies that are trying to be a part of the circular economy. They're using recycled content in their packaging, making their packaging recyclable. I would suggest supporting those types of companies.
Correct. And there's work being done to try to start labeling things so that you understand that a package has high recycled content. It's pretty light now to understand that. And most people, high recycled content, the number one high recycled content product probably, I don't know this technically, but I'm guessing it's toilet paper, and then paper towels, and then maybe office paper after that.
Yeah, by these materials that are used with recycled content versus virgin trees, which makes no sense.
Well, again, the economists, right now, in the take-make waste system, virgin trees are cheaper to process than recycled material. And that's another discussion for another day of how that happens.
What a shame. Stay tuned for that conversation, and make sure to join the conversation at our website, ecotopiaU.tv. Thanks so much for joining us today, and thank you, Tom.